Okay, so we had a little bit of an interruption there. I apologize for that. So thinking about marriage in terms of a conceptual account, a descriptive account, or an analytical account, we're probably not going to want to decide a question like, should marriage be expanded to allow a notion of two people of the same sex to be married? Defining marriage in that sense is probably not going to work if we do it from the conceptual notion, because the very question we're asking is, should we expand the concept that we have already? Since it is something that we determine as a society by our choices, going from what we've previously done is probably not sufficient. Also, because it's a question about what we should do, the descriptive definition is probably not going to be sufficient either, because descriptively we're just going to look at what we already do because of what we already allow. So the question of should the notion of marriage be expanded to allow for same-sex couples is going to have to be an analytical question. And that makes sense because marriage is a matter of law, it's a matter of contract, it's a matter of a social institution being set up by us according to what we think the law should be and what we think is best for society, right? We're not just going to go with our old notions or our old descriptions because, well, marriage itself has evolved over time. There are times when marriage was defined such that a woman could never request a divorce. There are places where marriage is defined to include things like a man literally taking a woman against her will and in some cases even having sex with her to solidify the marriage against her will. So we're going to have to choose not just what does it look like in the past, what's our concept now, but what do we want it to be. And Hastinger is suggesting the same thing with gender. Sure, there's something that we've thought of it as, and that's important, and there's things that we do now, ways in which genders tend to behave, but the important question for us, since gender is a social role and not just a biological fact, is how do we want gender to work for us in society? And most of you, when you asked yourselves this question in the homework, said, well, we don't think we should get rid of the notion of gender altogether, nor can we divorce it from those concepts we had in the past, nor do we want to ignore what people actually do and what gender means to them. But most of you said, for your analytical notion, you just wanted to give more freedom for varying ways of expressing individuality and individual notions of gender identity in ways that kept some of the traditional orientations but allowed for more freedom of expression, and that was where most of you were. Alright, so that finishes the section on descriptive, conceptual, and analytical notions of gender. And the only other thing I thought would be worth going back to, might be important for several of you and is oftentimes missed, was this question in pornography about the locutionary, perlocutionary, and illocutionary act. So locutionary act is just literally the act of speaking words. If I said the word no, and I spoke that word, I was not locutionarily silenced. I was able to speak. And that's usually what we think of as speech, right? If you got to say words, you were not silenced. But Austin points out there is also a perlocutionary act, and that's when we invoke a certain response, psychological or physical, through speaking. So think about something like, she stopped him from jumping by yelling stop. Part of the act that she did was to just say words, locutionary, but she also saved his life by letting him know that there was a cliff at the end. Perhaps an even clearer example is something like, you really did kill someone if you tell your attack dog to kill them, because there's a strong causal link between your saying kill and your dog actually attacking someone to kill them. You couldn't, for example, say, all I did was say words, and be surprised when you get sentenced to jail for murder, any more than, let's say, someone who shot someone with a gun could say, all I did was pull a trigger, I didn't shoot and kill someone. So if there's a strong causal connection and a known causal connection between a speech act and a result, then really that's an extension of the speech act itself. All you did was say a word, but you still killed someone when you did it. Someone causing a riot by yelling fire in a crowded theater, the issue is the same. You just said fire, but your speech act was the cause of people getting trampled, and so you still caused the riot. You didn't just speak. Then there's the issue of the locutionary act, and this is perhaps the most unique category where an act is accomplished merely by saying certain words. For example, I do, I resign, I declare war. You say I do in marriage. An institution of marriage, both legal, contractual, and ethical, has been created just by the words. They aren't just words. You can't go back and say to your husband after that, well, all I did is say some words. Why are you saying that I'm obligated to be honest and stay with you after that? Or if you say I resign, and then you go back to your job the next day, you said words, but you also created a certain kind of contract or relationship with your employer at that point. The president says I declare war, and because she is the president, when she says I declare war, that means war has been created just by the act. So how is Langton worried that this could be connected to problems with pornography? Well, pornography, she makes the claim, could silence. So what would silencing look like with locutionary, illocutionary, and perlocutionary considerations? So locutionary silencing would just be literally preventing someone from speaking by covering someone's mouth, or maybe also the example given in the book where protest language against pornography was literally confiscated and taken away. That's a case where your ability to speak and actually get your message heard or read is being prevented. So the actual words don't get out in the way that you want them to. But there could also be perlocutionary silencing. Remember, in this case, the issue is I spoke the words, but nothing happened. So in this case, Langton is especially worried about things like sexual advances that don't result in stopping, or sexual. She's especially worried about individuals, especially women, who say, I don't want any more sexual advances, and even though they say stop, they're silenced in this perlocutionary sense, in that their words are actually not listened to. So Langton's overall worry is that the way pornography represents sexual encounters between men and women seems to suggest in some cases that men don't need to listen to women when they say no. The worry is that it becomes sort of a social expectation that the woman's job is to say no, but the man's job, even though she says no, is to kind of keep persuading her, maybe even overpower her to a certain degree, and eventually she'll realize that that was what she wanted. So the worry here is not so much that it's not understood, as that even when it's heard and understood, the expectation is that it doesn't have to be followed. So in this case, that link between a speech act and the expected result is broken, and in that sense, the act of saying no is sort of ignored. It's not even heard. And so there's silencing in a perlocutionary sense. The illocutionary sense, remember, this is about those special legal and moral and contractual obligations that are created just through speech. So in this case, Langton imagines that a woman says no, and those of us who are thinking correctly are going to say, okay, a woman or anyone else says no to a sexual advance, there's an immediate legal and moral and contractual obligation for that advance to stop now. The perlocutionary issue is if I hear that, but it's just ignored. Because I think, well, that's my job to ignore it. The illocutionary issue is if I never even realize that the legal and moral obligation has been created just through the speech. So in this case, no is not even understood as really meaning no, or instituting that legal and moral obligation. And again, the same basic causal mechanism is implicated for Langton, that in pornography, models are seen repeatedly where no occurs as a signal, but is not shown to invoke this special legal and moral obligation. And so that legal and moral obligation sort of loses its force in society, and no longer can no actually be used to create that legal and moral force. Think, for example, of me if I was the president and then I had resigned the presidency. Once I've resigned the presidency, if I say I declare war, war hasn't been created because socially that institution isn't in place with me as a president anymore for war to be instituted. And so it only works in a situation where society is so constituted as to allow that special moral and legal relationship to exist. In the same way, Langton worries that a woman in a position where pornography is rampant in society is unable to use her force. She doesn't have to be president, right? She just has to be a human being with autonomy that's respected. And in that case, when the woman says no, she's kind of treated like the president who doesn't actually quite have the right after he left office to invoke war. In the same way, the woman isn't treated socially as actually instituting that serious moral and legal contract when they speak the words. Okay, so those are the essentials. I hope this has been helpful for you. These are some of the hardest things to get and often miss on the test, so hopefully this review is of use to you. I apologize that I didn't have time to make it sharp, but at least this should be the material that you need, because the reading itself is difficult. Good luck on your test. Goodbye.